MAVlab Innovation Talks, Truth Under Pressure, local government on the front line of misinformation. And we're incredibly excited to get right into this topic. We've got some incredible speakers lined up for you this evening. My name is Gemma Baxter. I'm here at the MAV. I work in MAVlab as the Innovation Program Manager. And in just a second, I'm going to hand across to my incredible colleague, Bonnie Shaw, who's going to get us stuck into the topic and introduce herself as well. And to begin this event, on behalf of Municipal Association Victoria, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners from which we're all joining on today. I'm in Preston in the City of Darebin on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung peoples, and I'd like to acknowledge traditional owners of country throughout Victoria and their continuing connection to land, waters and community. Now, please, I welcome you to share where you're tuning in from today. We know it's all over Victoria, also beyond Victoria, Queensland, New South Wales, Tassie. We saw your registrations that you're excited to tune in tonight. So thank you for joining us in this virtual space. Bonnie, I'm going to hand over to you and you can help us get stuck into it.
Very good. Thank you so much, Gemma. It's my absolute pleasure to be with you this afternoon. My name is Bonnie Shaw. I'm the Chief Innovator at the MAV, where I lead the MAVlab and have the pleasure of hosting these sessions every month. Tonight, I would like to flag that some of the content that we're going to cover might cause a little bit of discomfort for some people, and just flag that we are committed in our innovation talks here to building respectful conversation. We don't tolerate any form of abuse or harassment. And as always, we have allocated time for questions and discussion with our speakers at the end of the session, and ask that you post any questions or comments in the chat, and Gemma and myself will moderate those with our speakers. So tonight we are going to talk about mis and disinformation with some extraordinary people who are leading some absolutely extraordinary and critical work around the state and the world. At their best, our communities are shaped by a shared understanding, access to trusted information and respectful public conversation. When this holds, people can participate and connect and navigate change together. The surge of mis and disinformation in recent years is straining the conditions that support these, and it's putting pressure on the shared realities that bind us together. Much more than incorrect information, it involves misleading narratives designed and coordinated to exploit division and accelerate tensions. These are spread online through algorithmic amplification. They can drive confusion, reframe beliefs, inflame tensions, and lead to real-world harm. These are very real, erosive forces that are actively harming our capacity to find common ground, to relate to one another, and to build shared decision-making. And local government is on the front line of these challenges, with misinformation affecting service delivery, local businesses, emergency response, community safety, and increasingly democratic participation. Councils feel the impacts of reputational damage and disrupted service, increasing operational, legal and communication pressures, and declining trust and community division influencing or discouraging engagement in local decision-making. So this MAVlab Innovation Talk tonight will explore how misinformation and disinformation can affect councils operating in increasingly complex social and digital environments. We'll hear examples of how councils are responding. They're supporting communities to navigate false and misleading information. They're mitigating future risks and strengthening trust and building community resilience. This work forms part of the Disrupting Disinformation Ecologies project delivered with the MAV and the Australian National University and a range of international partners. This extraordinary program of work is led by our esteemed colleague, Ika Treisberg, and it's my absolute pleasure to introduce her tonight as our first speaker. Ika is the head of democracy and diplomacy at the MAV, and she holds a co-appointment as Director of Urban Analytics at the ANU Institute for Infrastructure and Society in the Crawford School for Public Policy. Ika also holds a visiting fellowship with the German Marshall Fund of the United States. She's a research associate with the Initiative for Peace Building at the University of Melbourne. And Ika draws on a vast and diverse sector expertise to assist cities to address complex challenges to democracy. She leads the Disinformation in the City project across 5 Australian universities, and she was the lead author of the world first Disinformation in the City response playbook back in 2024. She's a trusted advisor to local and federal governments around the world. And rather than continuing to tell you about all of her incredible achievements, I will let Ika talk to you about her extraordinary work that has earned her these extraordinary accomplishments. Ika, take it away.
Thanks, Bonnie. I appreciate that, and should have said just introduce me as Ika and I'll do the rest. But thank you for reading the full bio. That's very kind of you. And thank you everyone for being here on your Tuesday evening. I am beaming in from Naarm, Melbourne, here on Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country, and I'd like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, past and present, and also acknowledge any First Nations people who are here with us tonight. So I'm going to do just a brief intro because I'm not the main event tonight. The main event are the three local government representatives who are going to talk to us about this in action. But what I'm going to talk about is just briefly some of the framing from our work around disinformation, how we understand its impacts on local government and in the local realm, and how we know local governments are increasingly working to respond to disinformation broadly. You'll note that I'm using the term disinformation instead of misinformation. This is the first question that I always get asked. There are many terms. So disinformation is the deliberate sharing of falsehoods with intent. So it's when you know you're lying and you're trying to do something, you're trying to get something out of it. Misinformation, by comparison, is the sharing of incorrect information without necessarily having intent or knowing that it's incorrect. So it's important to recognise that we primarily focus on disinformation, which is created either for political or economic gain, usually. But at some point it becomes misinformation because people in our communities or even our organisations will hear that and in good faith continue to share that. So that's what's really important to look at the pipeline of operation. Dis and misinformation have been ranked the top global risk in a number of different reports now. The reason for this is not just because the information itself is harmful, though it often is. It's put very well by Nobel Peace Laureate Maria Ressa when she says that information integrity, which is the catch-all for this space, is the mother of all battles. Win this and we can win the rest. Lose this and we lose everything. Because we cannot come together, we cannot address the climate crisis if we cannot get a handle on our information environment. We cannot run functional elections if we cannot get a handle on our information environment. We cannot govern effectively. We cannot make policy if we cannot get a handle on our information environment. This is a very pervasive issue, and that's why it is wonderful that so many local governments are rising to the challenge. So what this looks like in the local realm, I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but these are just some examples of what this can look like. So increasingly we see deep fakes and AI manipulation. So this is when a fake photo or video or sound file is created to make it look like anyone, anywhere is saying anything. And it's very, very realistic and it can be very damaging, and increasingly these are targeting city leaders. When I say city, it's because when we work in the global space, we use the term city. When in the local space, we of course are referring to local governments, not just cities. Increasingly, we're also seeing AI manipulated images used in disasters and also tech facilitated abuse in communities. We're also seeing increasing conspiracism having local impact. Some of our speakers tonight may speak to that. But we're also seeing astroturfing, which is the misrepresentation of public opinion, and makes it very, very difficult for us to make sure that we are listening to our constituents and our communities in a way that can be reflected accurately in our policies. And then we see crisis and contagion. So we see the ways that disinformation ecologies, as Bonnie mentioned, the infrastructure, the social media and the algorithmic infrastructure, and the repeat users of disinformation create these patterns where these narratives can be shared from place to place to place. And we see that increasingly globally. So there are three key things that guide our work. And this comes from the Disinformation in the City Response Playbook, which was written by 40 extraordinary experts around the world, from many sectors, from the BBC, from Microsoft, from globally significant cities, from a whole variety of different backgrounds. And we came up with 3 key models that we understand to be critical to effective local disinformation response. The first is recognizing the component parts of trust. So trust is foundational. If we do not have trust, if we continue to have erosion of trust, we cannot address disinformation because it is critical. But there are 4 parts to this. So we need to have institutional trust, information trust, trusted people, and trusted places. And when we're working with diverse communities, as everyone in this room will be doing, we need to recognize that these look different for different people. There will be people who have different levels of trust in different institutions. That's okay. We need to make sure that we are increasing the trustworthiness of those institutions and building connections between them in a networked approach. The second is a 3-part model. So recognizing that disinformation response is not a matter of just responding once something has happened, but this is actually, it is a reinforcing cycle where we have the anticipatory stage, and we can do a lot in that stage. We know what are the common themes of disinformation that affect local government. They are health and well-being, urban planning and anything that changes the built form of our communities, climate and sustainability, gender and sexuality, and First Nations culture and religion. So these are consistently the fault lines that disinformation takes in cities. We can do a lot to anticipate what our work might need to be around disinformation that flares up along these fault lines. We can also build that network of trust in anticipation. And there's a lot of inoculation work that can happen. Then we move into the active phase. So that's when we need to be doing some of the pre-bunking, spread prevention, and starting to move into the debunking as well. So that's when something is active in our communities. We've got protests, we're getting the calls, we're having all of these things happening, and we can respond. And then debunking and recovery. So this is actually recognizing that communities, like with any other crisis or event that happens, they need to have that opportunity to recover. And the third is that this is a collective endeavour. No local government can address this in isolation. Our recent global survey found that over 90% of local governments are working with other local governments and with other sectors as well to address the impacts and to respond to disinformation in the local realm. There are different capabilities that are held at different levels of government in different sectors. And also there is a lot of knowledge that we can draw on from other parts of the world and from our neighbours. And there's a lot of collective impact opportunities. So this is not an individual endeavour. And if you're super keen and you would like to read more about these topics, we have a bunch of stuff that we've written about it. So you can access any of these. The top one is the Disinformation in the City Response Playbook, which I see Gemma has added to the chat. The second is one that we published earlier this year, looking specifically at the targeting of elected representatives and other leaders. And then the third is a 3-part series of policy briefs looking at disrupting disinformation ecologies, particularly to address violence and extremism in cities. And we have a micro-credential that we do deliver with the University of Melbourne if you'd like to learn some more practical tools about how to apply this to your city. Now I'll hand over to our local government representatives to take it away from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Ika. Awesome overview, straight to the point, and a great foundation for our next set of speakers. I have a question for you before I hand over to Jeff. You published the Disinformation in the City Playbook back in 2024. We're now halfway through 2026. How are you seeing things change, mature, develop in that time?
There are a lot of similarities. We've seen things get worse, particularly around the way that AI and particularly chatbots are enabling new forms of disinformation and enabling them to be more widespread. We're also seeing political use of disinformation continuing to increase in certain parts of the world, which then has a flow-on effect. Last year was the year of elections, so there was huge opportunity for foreign interference and also for disinformation to disrupt the functioning of democracies. And each of these things creates infrastructure that can then be used again and again. And so that's what we're seeing. What we're also seeing is much more response. So we're seeing particularly increased recognition of local response and the key functionalities and capacities of local government really being recognised at the national level and at the supranational level in ways that it hadn't been previously. And so that's a really strong positive for our sector to be able to step into this space and be more supported in our response.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Well, we're going to hear from a couple of people leading that response now. So first, I'm excited to introduce our first council presenter. I'm going to introduce Jeff Hills, who's the Manager of Community and Economic Development from Glen Eira City Council. Jeff is an experienced community and social impact leader with a passion for strengthening communities, creating opportunities, and driving positive social change. At Glen Eira City Council, he leads a diverse portfolio spanning community strengthening, wellbeing, and social policy, diversity and inclusion, community safety and social cohesion, First Nations engagement, economic development, and social and affordable housing. I think you hit the bingo with the list of trigger issues that Ika mentioned earlier, Jeff. Jeff is recognised for bringing together government, business, philanthropic, and community partners to address complex social and economic challenges, which sounds like the perfect skill set and experience to take on this challenge. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Firstly, I will echo the acknowledgements previously mentioned Victoria-wide, but Jeff Hill, so let's get into it. So responding to misinformation, a local government case study. So look, this presentation will share how Glen Eira applied communications, engagement and community development approaches to address misinformation and disinformation, helping to strengthen the trust and community resilience while developing our anti-Semitism strategy 2026-2028. So I think there's been some previous mentions of the word trust, and that will definitely float through today. So if we just move into so misinformation and anti-Semitism. So look, I'd like to talk a little bit about Glen Eira as a community. You know, obviously responding to anti-Semitism did require more than addressing incidents that were popping up. So looking at our community in Glen Eira, we have Australia's largest Jewish community of 17% of residents identifying as Jewish. We do have a very diverse multicultural municipality with 37% of residents born overseas. And this local context does matter, particularly when council are responding to challenging and sensitive community matters. So, you know, what we've heard and observed to date is that there are concerns about safety, belonging and inclusion. So community safety seems to be the highest ranking feedback that we get through our strategic planning, community surveys and the like. Misinformation and misunderstanding about anti-Semitism has really been highlighted also, with various narratives emerging online and within community discussions. This impact went beyond incidents, which was affecting confidence and participation from community, with an increase of a growing concern within the Glen Eira municipality. So what this meant for Glen Eira as a local government and why it matters is that we've got two focus areas. So in terms of communication, so our role within that we do want to make sure that we are providing trusted information and clear messaging, but also around the other side of things, which is community development and our role within that. So particularly looking at education, partnerships and resilience. We do need to address both misinformation and also community confidence. So in terms of responding to misinformation, this was where we started to build out the plan around the 2026 to 2028 anti-Semitism strategy. The line has really rung true around that you cannot educate your way out of anti-Semitism through facts alone. You need trusted relationships, community connection and prevention-focused approaches. In terms of particularly sorry, I'm just trying to see if I've got the right slide here. Sorry, everyone. I think I just went one too far down. I'll just restart. So while we responded in terms of a local experience and shared challenge, so looking at safety and belonging, hearing reports of a loss of pride and sense of safety, belonging and confidence to participate in community life has been something that I have heard in many forums, both from a local community setting as well as sharing within interfaith groups, in state government settings with rabbis, community leaders, community organisations, and that loss of pride and sense of safety is really something that has decreased. There's also been around the topic of community wellbeing is influenced by both incidents and perceptions as well. So in terms of when we are reporting or communicating around misinformation and disinformation, we are very cautious around be that if it's statistical reporting versus the perceptions. So what community is perceiving. So there is sometimes a disconnect that from a comms perspective, you need to address and manage that process. Online and social harm. So in terms of misinformation and polarized narratives, it can shape community perceptions. Online harm may not always be captured through formal incident reporting. Going through the development of the strategy and through our academic review, that has definitely been something that has been shared both locally, nationally and internationally from further research. Education and prevention. So education was consistently identified as a long-term priority throughout the engagement process whilst we build out the strategy. Prevention is as important as a response. And building understanding that does help address misconceptions before the harm escalates. Partnerships and resilience, we look at that local government cannot respond alone. So now I'll make sure that I'm on the right slide. There we go. So looking at responding to misinformation and beyond communications, this is going into the two areas as mentioned before, around communications and how we applied a communications approach. We explain local context before discussing solutions. We also look to communicate council's role consistently. And focus on community impacts, not geopolitical debates. We respond to misinformation with clear and trusted information. Whilst in the community development response is very much around a targeted engagement with the Jewish community and unrepresented voices often, and those traditionally not engaged or not a connected audience to council. Broader consultation was through workshops, surveys, stakeholder conversations, and this was including multicultural groups, leaders within multicultural groups as well, community houses and individuals. We have a launched social cohesion grants funding round as well. So amidst while we were building out a strategy, doing community engagement, in line with that was also a launch of funding and direct tangible impact that not just our Jewish community and Jewish organisations could see and feel and feel a sense of response, but it was also building out the rest of the community to connect to social cohesion. We focused on participation, prevention, and long-term resilience. So it is around communications, creating and understanding. The challenges and risks, navigating the division and trust was really something that it has been a consistent theme. And one of the biggest challenges was not the strategy itself, but how people perceived the strategy. We did have to navigate concerns around misinformation and differing expectations whilst maintaining trust and social cohesion. So one of the main questions was why a targeted response? And we looked at it, with Glen Eira being in a unique position with such a large Jewish community, with the incidents that had occurred, listening to our community, a decline in community safety, it did require a tailored, targeted response to support and act as an upstander in the current climate. Will this create division? Again, this division is the real uncomfortable, often elephant in the room of a conversation around many different skills and experts when you sit around a table of community leaders, academics, and the like, when you are building out something around this topic. And some people did question whether a targeted approach could become divisive. And throughout that process, the outcome was to be honest and upfront in what the strategy is, that it is an anti-Semitism strategy and it is not a racism or anti-racism strategy. It was to make sure that we are being clear and upfront with that messaging. Members of the multicultural engagement community respondents, there was one that I did note that said, we feel safe if our Jewish community members will feel safe. It's important to position the work within a broader anti-racism and social cohesion effort as well. There's still lots of work that is happening, lots of good things, lots of engagement, lots of planning and strategic work being done in the anti-racism and the social cohesion space as well. So it was making sure that we are bringing that to life, that it is still very much in play. Focusing on inclusion rather than exclusion. Can council make a difference? And again, local government, we cannot solve or address anti-Semitism alone. Looking at our role, it is to support safety, belonging, participation, and community connection. We do focus on the local impacts and the local levers available to council, whilst investing in driving and advocating with partner organisations and other levels of government. How we do respond to misinformation, we focus on understanding concerns and not correcting information. We explain local context before discussing solutions. Again, we communicate council's role very clearly, and that is something that's very consistent. We keep the focus on community impacts rather than geopolitical debates, as mentioned. And as an example, in partnership with City of Port Phillip, we hosted the Victorian Local Government Forum on Anti-Semitism and Social Cohesion in Feb as well. So making sure that we are showing that we are leaders and that we are also testing and trying different approaches, different forums, and in a collective way. If I just go through the final slide, is the 5 lessons for local government. So the learning, however you like to absorb this, these are the lessons that we would share, and we do share with local governments from our experience. We are drawn on in certain forums, if it's the local escalation and help forum, if it's within our social cohesion forum and our neighbouring municipalities as well, to give guidance around this space. While the context was anti-Semitism, many of these learnings apply to any complex or contested community issue. And misinformation cannot always be prevented, we find, but local government can strengthen the conditions that make communities more resilient to it. Lesson number 1, explain your role early and often. We found that has been something that we stand by and we are confident in. Facts alone are rarely enough. Providing accurate information is important, but facts alone do not necessarily build that trust. People are more likely to engage when information comes through from with in partnership or from sources from trusted relationships and institutions. Build resilience before a crisis. So really, trust and resilience struggles to be created once the tensions do emerge, we find and have found. So existing relationships with community networks is very, very important. And prevention and relationship building are those longer term investments. So there really is an ROI by that consistent contact, not just within a setting of when it's in a crisis, but also the celebratory moments that are happening within community as well. Listen before responding is a really, it sounds very cliche, but it has been something that we sometimes in council and local gov, it's around efficiency and getting that communication out and rapid fire. And what we've learned is that, again, going through that planning and staged, more of a phase staged approach, is that gives you the opportunity to listen. Listening has helped us understand where the community concerns are coming from and how to respond more effectively. And that is even when in the context of anti-Semitism, it can even be around the word anti-Semitism or who we're angling the communications to. It might not be exactly to, say, for example, if we're trying to address connecting with parents and with young children, is that the word anti-Semitism isn't something that parents embrace with their children. They don't want to be talking about it. They don't mention that word in front of their children. So it's those little nuances that we've learnt. And communication and community development must work together. So rounding out is the strongest lesson has been that communications and community dev, they're complementary. The community communications help provide the clarity and transparency, but the community development helps build that trust and that relationship and participation. And neither approach would be as effective on its own. So in closing, our experience has really reinforced that responding to misinformation requires more than correcting facts. It does require trusted relationships and genuine engagement with community and a real focus on that community resilience and that broader social cohesion vision. And finally, thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks so much for sharing. You guys have been doing some extraordinary work in challenging conditions, and it's wonderful to hear the various ways that you're approaching it. I would love to know, with the community grants program that you established, what kinds of ideas were presented by the community. They're often the best at solving their own challenges.
Yeah, look, there was, I think this was a pilot round. So it was a very quick turnaround in terms of taking it out to community. So I think there was a 4 to 6 week window of getting applications in and working with the organisations and community as well. But we had, we've had everything from, in terms of small children's play areas that have interfaith and multicultural families, so coming together. So building out, be that if it's within a community or neighbourhood centre, that there is a space for children to come together. So, and on paper, it might not look a traditional social cohesion grant of providing playground equipment, but the impact storytelling, which will come obviously later in the year, will start to then have those stories of different families, different backgrounds, different connections to what Glen Eira as a community is through these that sort of next gen of young families as well. Also, another one was around sporting clubs. So, hosting events and that was something that was a bit of a decline of previous recipients with our grants program. So, looking at if it was a multicultural sporting league, or engaging with communications and having events and the like as well. So that sporting crowd has really also been something that's connected in.
Yeah, that's great. Those critical bits that stitch our communities together, our kids and our teams.
Yes.
Next, we're going to move into a regional area, and we're going to hear about some of the amazing work undertaken by Indigo Shire, which is going to be presented by Kelly Sutherland, who is a Creative Communities Officer there. Kelly is an arts and community development professional with over 20 years of experience across the music industry, regional arts, and local government. I was surprised and had a very brief fangirl moment when I just read Kelly's full bio to find that she is the co-founder and co-creative director of architecture in Helsinki, which was one of my youthful passions. She brings a practitioner's understanding of creativity alongside deep expertise in community engagement, inclusive practice, and creative placemaking. And at Indigo Shire, Kelly is working as the Creative Communities Officer in the Arts and Culture Department, designing responsive programs that connect the blue sky of big ideas to the grassy roots of community action. And in doing that, Kelly recently led a program called Stand Together, Countering Misinformation, which is a library-based civic education program partnering with the UNSW Caldor Centre that equip participants with skills to identify and respectfully challenge misinformation. The project reflects her commitment to working alongside communities to strengthen cultural life, inspire grassroots action, and create the conditions of meaningful participation. And I would imagine, Kelly, with a foundational history on the stage, you're quite experienced with kind of being in the public eye, and so it probably lends a great perspective to undertaking this work. So really looking forward to hearing from you on this one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. I probably should have said don't mention that, because it always sort of like puts the wind up me a little bit. But anyway, life takes all sorts of twists and turns, and I've really enjoyed working with community and finding these kind of creative solutions for them. So I've just got my window to share. That's right. Is this correct? Do you have that? Because I currently don't.
Not yet.
Don't see it right now.
Uh-oh. Are you seeing all of my windows?
No, we just see your face.
Ah, okay.
Maybe try hitting share again. Sometimes
Okay. Classic.
It is a common challenge.
Yeah. Window.
If you get
This
stuck.
one. Here we go. Is that working? Yay.
Yes, got it.
Gorgeous.
Very
Cool.
good.
Okay, great. Well, yes, thank you. I think that maybe you said everything about my program that I'm about to say, but let's go ahead. So I'm going to share the story of Stand Together, which I delivered earlier this year through our library network in the Indigo Shire. It's a case study of how a small regional and rural council, we used our libraries as trusted civic spaces to equip community members with practical skills navigating misinformation landscape. Let's go through. Again, I echo the acknowledgement of traditional owners across Victoria. Indigo Shire is on the lands of the Yorta Yorta people, as well as many other mob, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So this is where we are. Indigo Shire is a small rural council in northeast Victoria. There's about 17,000 people across our shire, but it's a really large area. I made a calculation of about 16 football fields per person. So kind of imagine that. That's what we've got. We're a creative, resilient, aging community, but we're also really tightly connected, and that's really important when we're talking about misinformation. So the challenge we faced is this. Our residents are increasingly exposed to misinformation and disinformation in a rapidly changing media landscape. And at the same time, in a small community, misinformation just isn't, it isn't just online. It shows up at the dinner table, at the football on the weekend, in the school car park. And it's deeply personal. And so it's harder to personally challenge that without fracturing the relationships that hold regional life together. So how it all came about, excuse me. Indigo Shire Libraries received some funding through ALIA, which is the peak body for libraries, and the Department of Home Affairs Social Cohesion Unit to run some community cohesion programming. So as the program lead, initially I was thinking, what is social cohesion for our regional communities? What are our shared values and how can we celebrate those? In this region, community-led politics has really shaped part of our broader story. Indigo is part of Indi, and the independent movement here is not just political history, but a sense of pride for a significant part of our community. And so given that, I knew this thought of the erosion of democracy would really be of interest to our communities and how we can address how misinformation and democracy, the Venn diagram of that. But needing sort of more on the ground knowledge, I approached our library coordinator because she's got eyes on the ground and hears from community and their concerns every day. So it was her that shared with me the report from the Cawdor Centre for International Refugee Law, the report being Countering Misinformation about Refugees and Migrants. So she recognised the relevance to the conversation she was hearing in community. So we reached out to Lauren Martin, who is an award-winning journalist and a co-author of the Cawdor report. And as an academic, the feedback was, oh, this is great. People want to hear about our work. How incredible. So we worked really closely with Lauren to develop what would become a presentation for our communities. So the framework that's in the report, we worked with Lauren to build that into a program that we could take through our library network. We chose to work, this is quite an important part that I think is relevant to other local councils. We chose Cawdor deliberately because we wanted to reduce the risk of the workshop being written off as partisan before it was even delivered. Even in a current landscape, in this current landscape, factual information can still be read as divisive. And so we knew that choosing a credible messenger was a way to mitigate that risk. So what we did was we delivered 4 sessions and they were free in our libraries, one in each of our 4 library branches earlier this year in April. And Lauren led the content, and it covered how misinformation spreads, practical fact-checking tools and strategies for challenging false information while still preserving relationships. We also ensured that our participants could submit questions in advance. So the content that we created was really in line with exactly what our communities were grappling with. And critically, we chose libraries as the spaces for this because, unlike council chamber, we don't have convention centres and all sorts of wonderful venues to host our communities in. But a council chamber, our libraries in comparison are non-partisan and trusted within our community. Really important for us. So Deliberately, we built the whole program around preserving relationships, not just communication and correcting information. As I said before, in a small community, when you see everyone at the supermarket, you can't just tell someone straight up that they're wrong. You need tools to have those conversations respectfully and without fracturing those social bonds. So our impact, we engaged 75 participants across 4 days, across those 4 sessions. And it was a meaningful but small reach, but meaningful for our Shire. You know, I mentioned before how dispersed we are. And our 4 key outcomes were, first, participants built the practical skills for responding and identifying misinformation. The choice of libraries as a venue was really validated, having had multiple attendees say that the libraries were a key reason why they felt like they could come. Third, the relationship preserving framing was also consistently highlighted as a valued element. And really significantly, a discussion group formed organically in one of our towns of Beechworth, and participants have chosen to keep meeting to sustain the conversation. So we took this information knowing that we had begun to hit the nail on the head. And from the feedback from those sessions, we definitely realised that, yes, we will absolutely do this again. We have applied for further funding to support this. We still have the connections with the Caldor Centre, and there are many others, many other programs that are beginning to start to float around to be led by library staff and other facilitators that you can bring into your communities. So that's happening. Internally, the project built a stack of capacity. Our library teams had not experienced designing civic programming before, civic education programming, sorry. And now they're further equipped with navigating politically sensitive content. These are our 6 things that we learned that I wanted to share with other councils. So one is to use your libraries as the most trusted non-partisan spaces that you have. 2, don't build from scratch, partner, researchers and other opportunities. I know that ABC Education has a whole stack of resources. It's definitely designed for a younger market. And I know that the ABC TV show Matter of Facts now has a workshop that is ready as a resource ready to roll out for local councils. Number 3, frame it around relationships, especially if you've got small communities. That really worked for us. Number 4, let participants shape the content through advanced questions. It's kind of similar to what we're hearing from Jeff about listen before you respond. That's my version of it in this way anyway. Number 5 is that our face-to-face community marketing was really successful through our librarians. That kind of like word of mouth rather than larger campaigns was how people learned about this program and why people came along, because somebody they trusted was telling them that there was trusted information. And number 6, don't be discouraged if you have modest numbers. We certainly noticed that we enabled deeper, more engaged audiences because we had small participation. Well, not small, but smaller than what perhaps 75 doesn't sound grand when. Anyway, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to share this program with you all.
Thank you, Kelly. That's extraordinary work. I hope you all are feeling very, very proud of what you're able to stand up on in a really proactive way. And I wanted to reflect. We've just finished a phase of deep research around how councils and communities are connecting with one another. And one of the things that we heard over and over again was the critical nature of libraries as these magic spaces that create a sort of container for connection. I think it's really interesting that the librarian, that role acts as a kind of censor of what's happening in community, but is also then a communicator as well. Yeah, I think the role of the librarian in this kind of work is a really interesting one. Libraries have kind of changed and evolved with the needs of their communities over time, and it seems like we're kind of moving into a new dynamic, particularly as so much of this the kind of digital information ecology degrades. These physical spaces are increasingly important. Are you seeing any kind of changes in how the librarians are thinking about their roles?
Certainly, as part of the broader creative communities team, I work really closely with the librarians on much of the delivery. And yes, that's been a topic of conversation. Misinformation, I mean, it came from the librarians as an important response to community conversations. So yeah, they're definitely aware that the online space and the distrust that the media landscape has enforced on people and community, people are coming to the libraries for them as a source of truth and a source of information that is trusted. I think it's Libraries Information Week next week, and the highlight of the week is Truth Be Told is the theme for Libraries Information Week, and that begins next week. We're doing a small campaign for that, was really trying to run another program again, but, competing priorities and all. But yeah, we're lucky that, make sure you go and thank your librarians. That's all I can say.
Always. Librarians are the best people. All right, we have one final presenter for this evening, and then we'll jump into some conversation. I would never say we saved the best for last, but Marjan Hajari is one of the greats in local government. I feel very confident in saying that, having worked with Marjan on a number of things now, both an extraordinary leader and very dedicated public servant. She has been an executive in local and state government for more than 20 years. She's currently the Executive Director of Strategy and Corporate Services at the City of Greater Dandenong, where she leads a very broad portfolio, including strategy, governance, organisational performance and corporate services, and is also a recent appointee to an honorary senior lecturer at the Australian National University. Marjan holds a PhD in urban planning and design, where her research explored the social and spatial dynamics of public spaces and the role of urban environments in fostering belonging, participation, and community connection, which is clearly a critical foundation for the work she will talk about and share with us today. Take it away, Marjan.
Thank you so much, Bunny, and good evening to everyone. Thank you for your kind words, and it has been my pleasure to work with MAV in various projects. So first, I do the hard job of sharing my screen. Can you see my screen now? Yeah, great. So thank you for the opportunity. Today, I would like to share with you the work that we undertook at the City of Greater Dandenong with some partners, regional partners. And before I want to share the detail of the project, I would like to start with a clear proposition, which this presentation has been built around that, which is about that, and I think the previous presenter talked about it a bit, that local government really cannot stop every piece of misinformation or disinformation. But what we are trying, and some lessons learned from our project, show us that how we can show through consistent actions that local government is not just a service provider, but a trusted partner and the source of truth. Because we cannot really stop rumor, we cannot stop social media posts. I'm sure you all and your council all has been the subject of this. We cannot stop the global conflicts and the narrative about that bring, again, I'm sure local governments more than any time, we are impacted by the national debates, polarization narratives. And but what we can do is important. That is really we build trust. Again, one of the advantage of being the last presenter that is really repeating some of the great things that, and I wanted also to mention, Jeff and I didn't coordinate, but Jeff, I realized that it's lots of lesson learned from your work I want to share in my work in the Greater Dandenong, which I believe that's a strong way of how we collectively can work through this issue. Last year, or more than like 18 months ago, our community in City of Greater Dandenong experienced tension related to the place identity and naming. And while the issue attracted attention, it really also emerged through a much broader context of the economic uncertainty, rising cost of living, global conflicts that also impacted our community. And it started to grow concern about our division in our community and conflict. So really these conflicts and challenges placing pressure on individuals, family, broader community, and we saw that even in some of the schools. And this is very important for our community to make sure that we are really building this cohesion across our community. I'm sure a lot of you know that we are one of the most multicultural communities in Australia. We have residents more than 170,000 people with people from over 150 cultural backgrounds. And this diversity is one of our greatest strengths in the City of Greater Dandenong. However, it also requires ongoing effort to ensure that everyone feels connected, valued, and included in the community. And in the time of tension, as we experienced, community can become vulnerable to misinformation, and also coming from the different backgrounds, not really understanding all of the democratic process, civic education can really enforce this conflict and can add more challenge and pressure on our community. So what happened for that when these challenges started, in response, without starting just to simply started to looking at the engagement and community engagement, we have been fortunate that we could partner with Home Affairs, the Office of Social Cohesion, and also we had the other partners in the region, City of Casey and Cardinia, because the issue was extended in that area. Also, we had the great opportunity to work with Victorian Department of Family Fairness and Housing. And thanks very much to Bonnie and the people in the Municipal Association of Victoria and ICA that they work with us, and Victorian Multicultural Commission. So we partnered together. I think the presenter were talking about that we cannot do it alone, and we partnered. The partnership was one of the strengths of the project that we did. And we designed this initiative. One of the greater opportunity we had also that we had Dr. Tanya Maltik, that I don't know if I thought that Tanya was joining this. If you are here in the audience, hi Tanya. And yeah, hi. And yes, Dr. Tanya facilitated as an independent facilitator. She led the project, which was a huge opportunity and a great opportunity for us. So the work was, and so we started the project. The important things around how and the aim was we run number of the workshop, but how we run that, the work was co-designed through a committee testing group, which had representative from all of the partners that I mentioned, but more importantly from the local stakeholders. So we had a group of the committee member, trustee committee member from the different groups, specifically the groups that was very impacted by this tension. So we work with them intentionally to how design and bring together the people from with different lived experience and perspective across Melbourne Southeast. So the objective was to share, to build a shared understanding of the social cohesion, strengthening connection between people and institution, and really uncover the shared value and experiences. So between November 2025 and February, and somehow until March, we run 16 workshops delivered across, and of course the libraries and the other places has been involved in getting the people, and we have more than 150 participants. More importantly, the participants were from residents, community organizations, schools, service providers, faith groups, businesses, young people, women groups, sports clubs, health services, and government representatives. Again, we had the sessions specifically for particular groups, for example, just for women, because we knew that it may probably help them to share some of their observations or reflection easier, but also we had the sessions that was open to everyone. Participants explore how social cohesion means to them in the local context and identify the pressure that they felt in the community. Really, these workshops were not designed as a crisis, one-off crisis response, and however, we started that as the time of the crisis, but they were designed to start to build the trust throughout the process and create the space for people to be able to listen, share stories, and hear perspectives that may not formally have the opportunity to share them. And it was a big difference from the normal committee consultation that you do. So before the workshop starts, the participants were asked to fill a survey that they share with us that how they feel about their neighborhood and have a strong sense of community, whether they feel belong and whether they felt able to have a say on the issues that matter locally to them. And they could choose from strongly disagree, neutral, agree, and strongly agree. Before joining these workshops, most of the result was around neutral and a bit of agree, which suggesting that we had a foundation, reasonable foundation in place, but not necessarily what we want to be there. But what's particularly encouraging was after the workshops, we overwhelmingly heard from people that they felt safe and confident to contribute. And they had the opportunity to listen to others, hear new perspective, and make new connections. And it tells us really that when intentionally you create a space for people to have the respectful dialogue, even it's the hard conversation, they continue to come and talk about that. And this is one of the practical lessons for local governments. Sometimes we try not to open up the hard conversations or see that too risky, and they can be, but when we are intentional and we design this with this intention to provide the safe space, we can see it occur. One of the powerful outcomes of the workshop was not really the action plan. It was a simple of the people like sharing their stories, which create new relationship, new understanding. And what I wanted to really emphasize today is the greater trust. Again, I know Jeff and Kelly both mentioned that, but this creating a trust through this conversation was very important and linked to what we talk about, the misinformation or disinformation. And this trust cannot really build with one consultation processes. It's built over time through visibility, honesty. Also, what work suggests the fact alone is not that people do not ask always about what is the information true. They also ask, who is telling me this information? And do they understand my community? Again, they wanted to make sure that the information is from the institution, that they have good understanding about their community. This initiative also reinforced that local government has important role as convener. It has been discussed that is not just the role of one entity. Council can bring together community organizations, government agency, businesses, institution, because we can strengthen trust through transparency and participation with the group. And again, we involve the groups in the conversation, and we know that it is important. The other things I have to mention before even we started this workshop, when we had the highest tension in the community, we also had a group of the committee leaders coming together, and they really had really the messages for the community that we found it very useful to engage them. And as the local government, we have the opportunity to do that. So some practical kind of actions, if you like, came out of this, which again, it is not groundbreaking, and you have heard some of that, but it came through really the workshops and the conversation we had. Building the relationship before tension. So one of the important things is that the social cohesion, or work through the social cohesion, cannot be started only when the conflict is, because at this point the trust may be already weakened. Maybe misinformation has been already circulated. And why it is related? Because in our case, the tension heightened because of the misinformation that was circulated in the community, and it was very important. So this is an ongoing journey, and even we finished that part of the project that through this workshop. At the moment in the council, in organization, we are working that how we embed all of this learning in all of the services that we deliver. So it's not the one-off on the crisis, but we had to start that at that time. The other thing is, again, this was mentioned, the civic education and language access. And it's not all about the having them, of course, is important, have it in the multiple languages, having accessible, but it's more than that. And again, through our case, we really saw that because it was not a clear understanding from the committee or part of the committee, how this decision are made, how it is civic process look like, some tension started, and the misinformation could get through very, very quickly, because without the council making any decision, the message was out, the decision has been made. And again, it showed us that we really need, especially if we are working with the committee, that they are coming from the other countries. Sometimes the countries that they don't have the trust with their government. So if you wanted to really build this trust, you have to see it as an ongoing civic education. And this language accessibility is not just a communication issue, it's a trust issue, it's a participation issue, it's a democratic issue. That's why we really need to think about the more culturally appropriate engagement with the committee. And again, in the work we did, having the representative from the stakeholders from that group in developing that was very, very important. So the other things is that we really invest in everyday places when the trust is formed. And again, we had good conversation around libraries. In our City of Greater Dandenong, libraries is one of the most loved places for people. It came a lot in the conversation from people that how they feel connected and how they like to really engage with people in libraries. In the Harmony Square, for example, that we had in the City of Greater Dandenong. And the places that you can call the third spaces, they are the spaces that often sometimes might be underestimated, but there's a great deal of the social cohesion really actually happen in that places, because people can really meet each other, meet the differences. And again, we heard often and repeatedly that people really value to have the opportunity in these places to share their stories and see the people from the other cultures and like understanding about the other people. The other very important things that we already had seen in the other platform or other occasions, but came through clearly, was the committee organization were repeatedly identified as the trusted connectors. Participants recognize that these organizations often provide support, connection, and advocacy. In City of Greater Dandenong, we have more than 400 committee groups. They are trusted groups. And again, to run these workshops, we really rely on that, and we really engage with them to make sure that we can bring people together. And they have a particular role. Faith leaders and faith committees has been also amongst one of the ones that really has been come up a lot, that how they really have a role in that. So if we want to accurate information to reach the community, we need relationship within these people and organization that community already trust. I believe that most of the communities has these examples from the COVID time, that when you reach out to the reliable resources, you could get the message through, and not always coming from the national kind of the media linkages. And the fifth one was we need to support community leadership, especially the young people. It came a lot. And that is important because young people are often deeply exposed to online environments and competing narrative and digital information. So at the same time, they are very popular, a powerful contributor to solution. Again, lots of information in the occasion that we were grappling with came from the social media, and lots of young people engage in that. So building this relationship early on and having this leadership through the young people, they can be really big influence on how we spread the message and how we build trust. And the last ones that I wanted to share, that how we can really use the art, culture, sport, informal activities as the low barriers for people. Again, it was touched on that, but we could see that engagement doesn't always come from the formal meetings, not always from in the chamber, or not always from the pop-ups that we set up as the local council. It can be really through participants and also the sharing their stories through these informal spaces and the practical way to go through that, because the strongest social cohesion work happens through these shared activities, and we keep hearing it from our community. So my proposition, sorry, I just back. My proposition is really, instead of we ask how we respond to misinformation or disinformation which appears, probably we concentrate as the local government, how we build communities that they are less vulnerable to misinformation and disinformation in the first place. And the answer is really build the trust, build the social cohesion. And with local government, we cannot stop every piece of this misinformation, but we can be really, as I mentioned earlier, we can see ourselves or work towards to be a trusted partner with have the source of truth. And trust is one of the most important assets a community can have. And I think we have a big role in local government to get through that. Thank you.
Thank you, Marjan. An incredible overview of some extraordinary work that your team and council have been delivering for quite some time in service of your community. One of the areas I'd love to touch on with you, knowing a bit more about this work, is that these conditions can be really challenging. They can emerge very quickly and then amplify. What are the conditions that you've seen in leadership to sort of step into this space with courage and authenticity?
Yeah, no, thank you, Bonnie. That's a very good question. And really, we couldn't be here and we couldn't go through that if we didn't have the leadership and support both from our administration, which means our CEO, and also our councillor and mayor. And really navigating this space and understanding that it's not all about the reports we put up in the council. It's not about doing a community consultation about the place identity or place naming. It is something deeper, and we have to think about differently. It's really what's through the leadership that we have. And it is really my message to all of the local council or councillors on the call, that really our leadership has been very fundamental. As I said, our councillor, our mayor of the time, our CEO, to support us all collectively and be brave enough to think about it differently and understand. And I think it's come from, of course, the passion that all of the leaders have our community, and also acknowledgement of the differences in the context and the community. So I think that has been very important, and thank you for bringing it up, because I had to acknowledge this. The project was driven with this leadership.
Yeah, thank you. Such a critical aspect of it as well, because it's an exposed position to take a stand against this kind of work. Now we have about 20 minutes left for some discussion with all four of our extraordinary speakers. Each have shared such a wealth of knowledge and experience from really interesting and still overlapping perspectives. And I would encourage anyone on the call, if you do have questions, anything at all, throw it in the chat and we will endeavour to get to it. But I'm gonna kick us off with a question to all of you, and maybe whoever feels most comfortable to jump into this, please do, and then throw to one of your fellow speakers next that you would love to hear from the most. I heard each of you talk about community resilience as a critical factor in communities' capacity to withstand dis and misinformation. And having spent many years kind of in and around resilience work, we know that resilience is the capacity to respond quickly, recover quickly from acute shock, and withstand long-term strain. And I think we see that kind of dynamic condition play out in both aspects, both long-term strain and acute shock in this space. And so I'm really interested to hear from you about the types of roles or engagements or investments or support that local government can play in that sort of foundational resilience support, as we know that our communities are coming under increasing economic, financial strain, cost of living strain, housing strain, environmental strain. The pressures around us are growing. And if that kind of foundation of resilience is critical in this space, what can councils do to help build some greater resilience in community? Can I throw to you first, Ika?
Sure. And thank you, everyone. That was super insightful and really great to hear about the things that you've been doing in your communities. So thank you. So I'll provide like an overarching thing around resilience, and then we can go back. We can just follow the same model. So I actually, when I apply a resilience frame, I use Fran Norris's model of adaptive capacities. So not just our ability to bounce back, but our ability to adapt to the challenges and crises and changing contexts and conditions of our communities and our spaces and our environments. And there's four broad areas of that. So there's information and communication infrastructure, which is sort of a key area. There's economic development and equity of economic resources. There's community competence, so the ability of communities to actively participate and engage themselves in making decisions and building the community that they want. And then there's social capital. And so the connections between communities, within communities, and then between them and different types of institutions. And all four of these have been tested multiple times as being really critical in connection with each other in our ability to adapt to challenges that we experience as communities. I recognise that none of this will be new to anyone in this room or any of you, but I'm interested to hear from you about the ways that you invest in each of those four quadrants around building the resilience or the adaptive capacities of your communities to this.
Are you going to throw to Jeff? You're going to take the mic.
Oh, here we are. Lucky me with the big questions kicking off. My gosh, here we go. No, look, I think, and even at the moment where we are looking at drafting up our 26 to 29 community safety framework. So resilience forms a large part of that as a part of the deliverables, as well as especially in our economic development future framework space around wellbeing economy principles. So it is a thread that is continued both from a community but also local business and trader and economy perspective. But look, I guess the three areas of resilience that we highlight is going back to the And the main one is that strong community connection and sense of belonging. It's kind of that is where we have the most influence within a local government setting. I think around we are that that connector. So be that if it's new community organisations, existing community organisations, and brokering that awareness together. But it's also around then the efforts of connecting in with the vulnerable, disconnected community members, which from both vulnerable community member that's disconnected and very engaged community member, that connection is that sense of belonging on both fronts, and around building up resilience and hope and understanding and empathy and learning and all those things happens within those magic moments. In terms of the mechanisms of how we do that, it is through investing in our neighbourhood and community houses. So making sure that we are underpinning from a financial, operational funding perspective within our neighbourhood and community houses. It's also forward planning within those leaders of the neighbourhood and community houses to look at capacity building, understanding what they need as support, looking at the frontline worker support within these grassroots organisations. They are the drivers of what do build connection and a sense of belonging and that resilience outcome. That is where it's happening within community. So from council's perspective, that's where we can have the most influence.
Very good. Kelly, in terms of some of the things you're seeing kind of leading into or as a result of the work that your team have been doing in your local area, some thoughts on how to build resilient capacity against mis and disinformation in your community?
Yeah. I loved what Jeff was saying about the neighbourhood houses, because programming is really where my expertise kind of is at, rather than we're a really under-resourced local government. We've got, like I said, we've got a huge area, really differing townships, and programming through our libraries and in partnership with our neighbourhood houses is the best way for us to have that grassroots action to build the resilience of our communities. What we're seeing working is the Stand Together program that I ran was part of a broader Stronger Together program, which had 6 different ongoing programs through our libraries, pardon me, with the explicit intent to build capacity and bring communities together to celebrate shared values for social cohesion. What I've learned this evening, which I'm really taking on, is just really uncover this constant need to listen to our community and our current need to really investigate what our specific shared values are. That's what I'm taking away from today and taking back to my team this week, is how can we investigate really what our shared values are so that we can gather around those to really build that social cohesion and resilience.
Yeah, amazing, fantastic. Thank you. And over to you, Marjan. Some of the things that you're seeing as a result now of having done this quite sizable piece of work, what are some of the things that you're seeing implemented in your community or in your organisation as well, or as a way of kind of continuing to build resilience?
Yeah, no, thanks. And as I alluded to that, one of the lessons learned and one of the things we heard is that people would like the opportunity to work together for solve the problems. And it was very interesting outcome, because the whole the issue started from the conflicts between different groups. However, when you provide the opportunity for people to come together and understand and have this conversation, they keep saying that we wanted to have the opportunity to come together and solve the problem, the civic problems, which it means that it builds their cohesion, it builds their resilience. So that is what we are looking at now, how, you know, in City of Greater Dandenong, we run, for instance, so many events. I think probably one of the big cities. And because, again, we have so many cultures, it's fantastic events, and we had so much awards for the different kind of the events we deliver. One opportunity can be that while we are acknowledging all of these different events, different cultures, where are the opportunity can be inbuilt for intercultural dialogue and for people from the different cultures and the different ages, they come together and have the conversation. So for us now, one of the ways is, of course, as I said, we have all of these community groups. We built really, it's really strengthened our community, and they are very deep rooted in our community. We wanted to make sure how from all of these opportunities we have, we can really uplift the opportunity for the residents, for the community to come together and have opportunity to talk, to solve the problem, and to feel part of the decision making in the city, or the civic education, if you like.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to reference the question. Thanks, Mike, for putting this in the chat. Ika, you mentioned at the beginning of your introduction, last year was the year of elections, which can be a heightened environment for disinformation. Can you expand on that a little bit, and talk about kind of some of the dynamics that can appear during those kinds of times?
Yeah, absolutely. And elections are a flashpoint for disinformation, in terms of political use of disinformation, as we do see by select political actors around the world, but also in terms of foreign interference, and people seeing the economic gains in clickbait around elections. So there is a real peak that we do see. We're very fortunate in Australia to have extremely trusted and high integrity levels in our electoral commissions. So that's something that is very much worth protecting and recognising. But no institution is above supplying a critical lens. We need to make sure that we are first and foremost increasing and protecting our own trustworthiness, and then making sure that any partners that we do engage with are also putting in place mechanisms to ensure that they are not using or sharing disinformation or inflaming tensions. We do have some commissions, some departments, some institutions within Australia and globally that do this extremely well. And we have others that are still developing, similarly to how we have local governments that are doing this extremely well, and others that are still developing capabilities. And that's something, when we do engage in that networked response, whether it's across different levels of government or across different sectors, that we're really clear about what we expect in terms of the transparency, the trustworthiness, and the consistency and capacities of ourselves, but also of the partners that we're legitimately working with.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Now, we always like to finish these conversations with a hopeful note. And so we've shared some heavy stuff tonight. We know that there are some challenging conditions that we're working in and operating in today that's not going away anytime soon. And we've also heard some really inspiring stories of how councils are already stepping up to meet those challenges. I'm going to go back the other way this time and start with Marjan and then finish on Ika. And I'd love to hear one thing from the work that you've been doing, or from what you've heard from colleagues tonight. One thing that gives you a bit of hope about councils' potential to step into this space and do continue the good work of serving their communities.
Thanks, Bonnie. And I have to say, it has been very, very promising. As I mentioned, that without sharing the detail of the presentation with my colleagues here, especially Jeff, I see that running two different separate projects in the two different contexts, we all are like sharing the same lessons, which about that we as the local government have a role. We are not alone, and also it doesn't matter where we come from, but we are all aiming to make a more cohesive community, which I think is very promising, and lots of great work is happening. And when I was in Canberra, like a month ago, I could see that is the front mind of leaders in the local, state, and federal government. So I think that's the positive news. Yes, the problem is there, but I think it's now getting the attention and it needs, and I'm very hopeful that we all collectively can get through this.
Very good. Thank you. Kelly.
I think I'm just reflecting that really low effort in interactions with community can have really high impact, and that it's really exciting that outcomes from what I've heard tonight are a higher engagement with civic participation, so that things like democracy is alive and well within our communities. So that's my hope.
Very good. And Jeff?
Thank you, and a big thanks to everyone for dialing in and listening. Look, the reflection is definitely, and it's heartwarming that everyone is thinking about the now whilst looking ahead into the future as well. And I think that's super important whilst we are in a responsive operating role that we have within local government and the area that we're in. But it's also making sure that we are being strategic. And I think that having that balance of that research, academia, peer knowledge bank, and sessions like this to share, I think really do underpin and form part of that balance, and finding that balance right of looking ahead and learning, but also making sure that we are being very responsive to what the community need is. And again, that's going back to trust, listening, things of resilience, and so on. So yeah, very heartwarming. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. And Ika, to bring us home, I'm going to add a little bit of extra homework on your question. As one of the leading practitioners in this space in the world, I'd love to hear a word of caution. Give us a dose of reality before we head out, and then the thing that gives you hope.
Okay, the word of caution is do not underestimate the impact of disinformation. It is not just something that politicians are throwing at each other that we see in headlines. It is an ecosystem that has very, very strong economic underpinnings and motivations, and people who will protect that because they like that. The optimism is, anytime you feel like this is an insurmountable issue that you're experiencing, please turn to other local governments. Google, what are cities doing to respond to disinformation? There's incredible stuff. Greater London Authority does fabulous stuff. Nordic Safe Cities have got together, have a whole bunch of things that they share openly, because local government is so agile in this space, committed to community benefit and economic benefit and environmental benefit and all the other benefits we get from responding to disinformation effectively, and really good at collaborating and sharing. So I really encourage you to reach out to each other and globally to others who are all contributing to this space.
Thank you very much, each of you, for your wisdom and experience, and for sharing your time and energy with us all tonight. Thank you to everyone that joined us on the call tonight. Tell your friends, share the video when it's live. We need to get more people actively understanding and working in this space. And finally, as always, thank you all for the incredible service that you do to your communities, to your organizations, sometimes at great cost to yourselves. We're all in this together, trying to build safe and healthy places for ourselves and our communities. So thank you all very much for tonight, and hope to see you on the next one in a month. Take care.